Morning, afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes to ensure we can get everybody on the call, and we'll kick off. Okay, we'll leave it a few more minutes. We've got 15 on the line. So I'll just kick off with a bit of housekeeping. So, thank you very much for joining today. We'll be doing some Q&As. So if you have any questions throughout the fireside chat, please drop your questions in the Q&A and we'll answer those. In terms of the recording, we're also recording this, so we'll share the recording if you want to revisit or share with your colleagues later on. But we'll kick off. So I'm co-founder of Earthly, Lorenzo Corci. At the heart, what we do is really help businesses advance their climate ambitions. I'm joined by our three panelists today, and really happy to introduce them. Lucy Wintburn from Savills, Richard Ford from Lead Associates, and Jonathan Monkley, co-founder of Zero Construction. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. I'll go in order. Richard, if you want to start by introducing yourself.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Rich Ford. I am the founder and a partner at Lead Associates, and we struggle with guiding and influencing people towards the net zero carbon horizon, and we assist and support people in that adventure, looking at how we develop their thinking and implement thoughtful and agile ESG strategies.
Thank you. Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Winterburn. I'm a director of investment at Savills Investment Management. I look after a portfolio of properties in the UK across all commercial asset classes, so offices, industrial, retail, car showrooms, the whole gambit, and we have full discretion. So in effect, we are making decisions all the time in terms of strategy for that fund, how that fund will operate and deliver financial returns, but increasingly ESG is a huge part of that conversation, and an ambition to achieve a net zero carbon target is a big part of what I do.
Super, thank you. And Jonathan.
So hi, Jonathan Monkley, co-founder of a community called Zero. That's one of my hats. My day job hat is I lead the digital services team in a company called WSP. We are future tech consultants, basically leading anything digital in vertical assets, predominantly working in the UK.
Super, thank you. So, from a lot of us are working and really aligning ourselves to guiding businesses towards net zero. At Earthly, our ambition is to help, to invest in high quality nature-based solutions, indexing not only on the carbon, but on the social factors and biodiversity. A lot of the clients that we're working with, are really challenged by the need to reach our climate goals. And, I think the built environment is one of our key sectors. And I think, to start us off, I think one of the things that I think there's a lot of confusion around is the actual aims to net zero. And so in sort of explaining sort of, again, for those that already know it, but the science is really just to look at, you know, what the science says once again. And I think, you know, net zero in you know, the IPCC set these targets for us globally. And I think there's a lot of different terminology which we can talk on around net zero, but you know, the ambition of the IPCC was to set a guidance to reduce emissions by 2030 by 45%. And you know, these are critical to ensure that we can keep global warming within 1.5 degrees. I think interestingly enough, you know, the UKGBC and the UK's standards are also aligned, but sometimes have different numbers and different ways of looking at this. So I know that the UKGBC is looking at a reduction strategy of 78% by 2035. And so I think here it's around the clarity. I think the number one thing that we all see, and I work closely with Richard and others, is that we have this desire to, and this need to reduce emissions. And from what we're doing today, there's quite a lot that needs to change. And that's, you know, in the built environment, that's embodied carbon, operational carbon. And these challenges are quite large because the status quo of what we've been doing has not, you know, been good. You know, if you include ground transportation, the built environment, the carbon footprint is up to 40% of the UK's carbon footprint. And so here's the need to really look at all of the things that we do and to help those within the built environment to find the solutions that can help them achieve those goals. And, you know, that's really what I wanted to ask the panelists today, is to help us and those on the call to sort of better understand, you know, how we are achieving those goals. What are the things that we can do to help those in the position to make decisions to help reduce emissions, to facilitate them and to help them. So, you know, I think my first question really is to Lucy, and I think, you know, you're dealing with this from an asset manager point of view, the need from clients that often have their own ambitions that need to align then with their assets. What work have you been doing for your clients, and what would you say, you know, has been the most challenging aspect of delivering on these net zero ambitions?
So I would say the first thing that we've had to do is try and sort of demystify and debunk the whole topic, because there's lots of buzzwords, there's lots, you know, you start talking about one element of this journey and it grows arms and legs, and you know, you can go off on a tangent and go down a rabbit hole if you're not careful. So trying to sort of distill what we're trying to achieve, get rid of all the noise and try and really make a focus of what we're trying to get to. And then in the portfolio that I look after, we have, as I say, a range of assets. Some are multi-let, some are single-let, some where we have a greater control over how that asset performs, others where we've let the space on an FRI lease, and that's, you know, brings its own challenges if you don't have a tenant in that space that wants to work with you. Data has been a really, really big problem, and that's something that seems to come up on every one of these that I am on or I'm listening to. Data seems to be the thing that everyone is grappling with, particularly in a building where you don't control the data, and trying to say, and you've got leases that don't allow you to get hold of that data. There's nothing to compel the tenant to share that data with you. So without that baseline of understanding just how good or bad your property is to begin with in terms of operational emissions, you're sort of slightly stabbing in the dark as to what you should do next. So it's sort of trying to get the whole house in order, which is difficult when you've got so many different, I mean, I think we've got over 100 tenants in our portfolio. So yeah, that's a lot of people that you've got to convince to come on, A, to come on the journey with you, and B, to work with you. And then just trying to make a sense of what is achievable and what you can do. Because, you know, it's all well and good setting targets, but those targets have to be, well, they have to work. You know, you have to have, it needs to have a goal that you have a standard chance of doing. Otherwise, why set the goal? So yeah, it's, and in a house like Southampton, I look after one client. We've got loads of clients here. that range hugely in terms of where they come from in the globe and what their aspirations are. So try and sort of marry up individual client aspirations against what we think is the right thing to do. Yeah, it's a hard one, and it's one that we've had to get very cleverly, cleverly on, and be clear and be concise in how we want to deliver those goals to those clients. So yeah, it's not been easy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you touched on there was data, and I think the interesting thing is, without measuring, we can't move forward. We need to measure, and I think a lot of people are still at that measuring part. And as you said, there's lots of different solutions out there. But I guess that leads me to Jonathan. You've been leading digital strategies and looking at technology as a way to improve how we achieve our goals. What would you say where do you see the best opportunities for technology to actually help achieve net zero? Where do you see these opportunities?
Well, to build on Lucy's point, measurement is probably the starting one from my job's perspective, given the fact that the team that I run, we help facilitate measurement on projects. Carbon is something we've started looking at, and it's an extremely difficult baseline to kind of get on projects, whether it's embodied or operational, because the data just isn't there yet. I think there's various different new emerging techs, things like digital twins from energy management. I think energy efficiency can be managed by emerging systems like digital twins. It's probably one of the most quickest and cost-effective ways to reduce the emissions of an asset is to measure them and understand them and optimize them. Things like smart building tech can help you improve that. There's case studies out there now, some of the projects we've worked on, where you can reduce the energy use of an asset by 50% just by managing it better. The first ever digital twin project I was involved with, where we started measuring how the asset was, it was a very simple project. It just needed to measure temperature in the rooms of a school. It actually turned out that the commissioning system that for the asset every night was putting the building up to maximum and then down to minimum every night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and nobody knew that, and the asset had been alive running for about 3 years. So there's opportunities there. There's insanely fast advancement in renewables. I think generally businesses can digitize the way they operate. So, for example, I'm working from home today. I haven't traveled. That's going to reduce carbon. Less asset space required for businesses running huge businesses. I also think technology can help companies reduce emissions through better supply chain management by enabling more efficient logistics, tracking, reducing waste. An interesting one we've started to look at is Zero is carbon capture and how that can basically allow you to reduce your emissions across the board. It's also a big part of WSP's work as well. But there's lots of different interesting opportunities, and I think technology there is absolutely fundamental to any kind of net zero goal.
Yeah, I think we've seen that at Earthly with on the carbon side, where satellite information is much more readily available to assess what's happening on the ground, especially around nature-based solutions. We're seeing, eDNA, being able to quantify the different amounts of species on the ground, which I think will be really important for the UK when looking at, biodiversity net gain and bioacoustics. So definitely think that technology provides a huge ability for us to reach our goals, and it's finding the right one that works for you. And I guess that takes me on to Richard. Richard, you're working hands-on with a lot of people that are looking to improve, reach their targets, set some ambitious targets. When you're speaking to your clients, what solutions have you been able to see provide the most short-term value? Often it's sort of, I need a quick fix, or I need to achieve that. What are you seeing there?
There's it's a real mix of having the foresight to utilize and integrate technology, and then optimize its performance. We see things like energy generation and energy storage and smart distribution of energy is emerging really quickly as one of the fastest growing technical solutions that people are buying into. The fast pace of change in things like lighting technology and the management of lighting systems is also providing some incredibly efficient solutions to people. I mean, for instance, some of the lighting systems that were put in 3 years ago, LED lighting systems, are being replaced now with even more enhanced options. So actually providing something in the region of about 17 to 18% enhanced savings on energy reduction. So I think one of the tragedies that we're in at the moment is actually the business case for investment has been further enhanced by the current financial climate with the rising cost of energy. And this has triggered a lot of interest in actually, I can afford it now, and I can't afford not to do it. So strategies for looking at supplying energy from renewable sources, whether it will be solar PV or whatever sort of form of generation that works efficiently for the building you're occupying. Actually, now the appetite for that is delivering some really good opportunities to deliver sort of baseline energy to a building, whereas before from grid, this baseline was a significant cost, you know, and also always a long-term liability to the business. Well, efficiently now, if you've got a standard sort of distribution warehouse, let's say, or maybe an office which has got a reasonable opportunity to generate and store its own energy, the potential savings and the return on investment are so good that actually it's so compelling. It's hard to sort of ignore it because not only does it do your operational costs a lot of good, but it also retains the value of the asset going forward. So there's some really compelling circumstances right now to start looking at things like solar PV. Even on facades, we're seeing transparent solar PV becoming more and more effective. Looking at carports which are in island mode for things like EV car charging and energy storage. You know, the technology is improving. The efficiency of the battery systems are improving, but also we're looking at other things like in construction, looking at the evolution of concrete is getting so much better. People are more thoughtful about the products that they're choosing for insulation, and the fabric first approach, so that you actually reduce the amount of energy that you're projecting to consume. Everybody's actually being more thoughtful. So the technology is advancing well. I don't think that we're quite there yet in terms of having the ultimate solution in terms of battery storage, but certainly solar PV is a hugely attractive option at the moment.
Yeah, I think we've seen that with some of the projects, and I think, you know, I think looking at the cost of energy, like you said today, and also, you know, the future risk of carbon credit pricing as well. You know, the discussion there is, you know, prices could increase to $100 a ton by 2020.
Yeah.
You know, the factor that, you know, looking at making this work for your goals. And I think the carbon cost of a climate pledge, where a lot of businesses are setting pledges to be carbon, you know, net zero by 2035 or 40, needs to take into consideration that residual emission. That cost will be a part of what your CFO will be scratching his head to have to pay for. And so I think we need to take all these considerations into place to look at the investment case today, like you know, like you do so many times.
Definitely.
I guess, Lucy, that sort of brings me to sort of a lot of, you know, when we're building new structures, you know, we've got some certifications that a lot of people are using. I'm thinking of BREEAM and many others. You know, do you see that they are fit for purpose for guiding us to achieve these net zero goals? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as an industry, we love a certificate. So institutional investors love something that says it's ticked a box. So we do all sort of rush to get BREEAM Excellent or EPCA or whatever it is. We on the projects that I've been involved with, because Diageo, my client, doesn't only own building standing investments, but we also do a lot of direct development. Thankfully, with the client's sort of permission, we've been, and actually encouragement, we've been doing quite a lot of forward thinking on the stuff that we've been developing, and ESG has been a big part of the design process. So, you know, I'd like to think we've been relatively ahead of the curve in what we've been doing so far. BREEAM was definitely something that we added to our list of requirements in terms of when we were working with developers or developing or designing stuff ourselves with a professional team that we brought on board. We started out quite a long time ago saying we were setting the bar at BREEAM Excellent because we felt we needed to sort of, you know, go above and beyond. And that was really a thing around trying to future-proof the assets that we were developing, because our client was very much about building to hold rather than building to sell. So it was about having an end product that we were comfortable was, you know, the most resilient in terms of valuation and design going forward. EPC, I mean, everyone strives, well, we all have to have EPCs, and everyone strives to be now in that sort of A and B sector of EPCs because of what's coming down the track and the 2030 deadline for getting there. I have some cynicism around EPCs simply because our experience here is that send 2 EPC assessors to a building and you'll get a different result. And I think it's quite a blunt tool personally. So whilst I know we've got to have them, and regulation obviously forces you to go down that route, I'm not sure they're necessarily the best. I mean, clearly, again, it's a box tick, and we all know where we need to get to. But as an industry, we're all marching towards A's and B's, and everyone, I'm sure, will get there. So they're definitely things that we take account of. But I think if you just go that far and then stop, I suspect my feeling is that's not enough. Which is why whenever we've developed more recently, we have very much thought about achieving a goal that's net zero rather than just BREEAM and EPCA. We've gone to the net zero both in construction and in operation in terms of design. And that's the bit that doesn't have regulation at the moment. But I think, well, I think we're all agreed that it's coming down the track. So hence why we've sort of put that in as an additional target for what we're doing.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, the UK GBC is building sort of a net zero building standards alongside LETI, RIBA, RICS, you know, and I think that's really where, you know, there'll be some real standardization. And I think,
and to be honest, if someone could give me a certificate that says you have got a net zero carbon building, that would be amazing, because then all this greyness around what is net zero and what does that mean would fall away. You know, there's been lots of chatter in the market about greenwashing, and you know, is it enough just to say, well, I take green energy, therefore I am net zero? It doesn't feel quite right to me. But you know, some people will say, well, that's my job done. We've gone to the other end of the scale, rightly or wrongly, and you know, we feel that to do it, certainly from an institutional investor point of view, if you're going to set that standard, you need to be wholeheartedly, you know, on board, and it needs to be audit worthy in terms of what you've done.
Yeah, and I think one of the difficulties we see is that, you know, there, especially around embodied carbon, there's a lot of change in a world where previously concrete and steel were the main go-to for building blocks. And I guess that, you know, Richard, that particular element of embodied carbon, you know, where do you think people are with that side of, you know, the reduction strategy? Do you think that we're moving fast enough to look at embodied carbon, or?
No, I don't think so. Actually, retrofitting existing buildings and repurposing buildings, I don't think that we're anywhere near where we could be, and certainly repurposing materials is so important right now. I've just come out of a meeting where we had an interesting discussion with a architect, where the discussion centered around, well, should we demolish and rebuild, or should we retrofit the building? And so the assessment of the embodied carbon route of the procurement and the construction of the materials or the products that you're going to use in the construction of the building, versus the repurposing of a building and the reconstruction of the building with better materials, but without significantly changing the structure, is one which doesn't it doesn't really feature in people's thinking at the moment. And then the consideration of embodied carbon doesn't really filter down into the construction industry enough, in my mind, because the bottom line cost to supply some goods normally is the be all and end all of that argument. And at the moment, we're seeing that people aren't thoughtful about, so where is this product coming from? What is its embodied carbon profile? And my business partner and I were working on one project where I can tell you that the steelwork had been ordered from a manufacturer in Spain for a project in Rotterdam, and yet there was a steelwork manufacturer and supplier around the corner who was about, I think it was about 3 or 4% more expensive. However, because of the bottom line price being the feature of the procurement strategy of the contractor, the embodied carbon wasn't even thought about until such time as the ESG and sustainability consultants got on board to say, hold on a minute, this is absolutely ridiculous. You know, it wasn't even about the material performance of the product. It was just in terms of the procurement strategy. So I really don't think that we are suitably informed as an industry to make the right decisions, because the principles of the procurement strategy from the developer or maybe the building owner aren't broad enough to capture and identify the priorities. And the priorities should be, what does the carbon profile look like in terms of the embodied carbon? And also, as a product at the end of it, what does that do to my overall final ESG profile for the building once it's been either built or retrofitted? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of work to do still, and actually informing and advising and people recognizing and understanding is the big key.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, Jonathan, I get almost a similar question to yourself on the embodied carbon. Like, you know, what do the members within the Zero community that you founded, what are they talking about within embodied carbon, and what are the questions they're mostly asking?
The interesting thing is, to take the embodied carbon question as a starting point, the baseline of embodied carbon measurement across the built environment is, no one really has the answers yet. It's very much an emerging trend. Things like concrete and the structural steel, people are working on that, and you can measure that quite quickly. But then you bring in things like building services and it gets a lot more complex. But then you can look at a concept of a building and you can bring that baseline measurement together. And then, to build on Richard's point, the idea of, oh, well, we know how much embodied carbon's in a piece of steel, but then one piece of steel comes from around the corner, another one's shipped on a boat. It's an entirely different profile. So it's a very complex topic, but it's interesting. So the Zero community it's about 1,000 people from lots of different countries, about 30 countries, all from the built environment, all people working on construction projects, from architects, engineers, not sustainability professionals. Only about 20% of the community are sustainability professionals. And what we're trying to do is to build on Lucy's point of the fact that people want a certificate. We're trying to make sustainability and low carbon just part of people's day jobs and get people working on all their projects, and not just, oh, I've ticked this box, I can put it over here. But generally, the first question they're asking us now is, what can they do to help their projects? So that's what the Zero community is focused on. It is building a Wikipedia of how to deliver low carbon construction projects across a different set of chapters. There's one of the interesting things is how can I help? What can I do? How can I get my leadership to make more informed decisions? Speaking to some of the client investors, it's how do I build a business case to procure low carbon buildings, which builds on Richard's point. And what we've found is at the moment the evidence base isn't there that they can get like a really cheap low carbon project or a project that's comparable or baseline to a traditional project, usually because of concrete at the moment. So one project I was working on, the client said, right, I want to reduce the embodied carbon by 50%. But when you started to bring in the materials that did that, things like low carbon concrete, firstly, the concrete didn't hit the specification the client required. And secondly, it was going to take 6 months longer. So it was doable and the price wasn't an issue, but it was very much performance and program at that stage. But it's interesting how the construction industry, like the broader construction industry, the zero community is shifting its mindset to wanting to drive this agenda. And a lot of it is to do with things like they want to do something good for the planet. So they want to be seen to be helping the climate issue. And as someone who works in the built environment, you have more agency than a lot of people, the ability to implement embodied carbon on massive mega projects and giga projects. It's huge carbon reductions when you knock 1 to 2% of embodied carbon out of a tower in London or a skyscraper in New York or an massive infrastructure project. So you have a lot of agency for change. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the traction we're seeing within our community as well.
Yeah, and I think as we start to have this idea to what Lucy and Richard are saying about really creating a standard around net zero, going beyond these normal standards that we have, and start to include this conversation around carbon, and also attaching to that the value of these structures, what they ultimately, the value that they will have in the future. I think that's where it becomes really this ability to look at the investment case and say, if I do this, if I can deliver on this low carbon, low embodied carbon, low operational carbon building, I will also see an ultimate value. And I think that's what, the business case that continues to be seen, is that there's yield value, there's the value on these buildings. And I think interestingly, what we looked at Earthly was, the finance, and especially if you're looking at science-based targets for the financial institutions, the money that is lent from financial institutions will be the carbon footprint, the scope 3 of these institutions. And so when they're investing in greener assets, they will be seen as a removal. And so it's the functionality of the system to look at carbon, to look at this net zero ambition and to package it, I think makes a lot of sense. And so it's giving people the tools to speak to the CFO or the clients to say, this ultimately provides value. And I think that's, we need that structure. And it's nice to see, like you said, Lucy, that you're creating that framework already.
Yeah, just adding to that, Lorenzo, and you understand the work that we do, working alongside some of these financial institutions. They're recognizing the value and the long-term asset value of sustainably orientated buildings, ones which have good performance credentials and good character. And their investors are recognizing that. And the demand now from investors that we're working with has translated into actually a lower cost of debt. So the debt that they're providing, they're actually encouraging developers to move forward, and that's a really big step, and it's an important step. But obviously this has to be backed up by people participating in this and not falling back to traditional methods of low cost is best, and I'm not really bothered about the consequences. That's somebody else's responsibility to take on, But we're seeing actually from the investor point of view that there is some responsibility, there is some initiative, and actually there is opportunity. So I think the market is moving in the right direction.
And I guess, Lucy, this you live and breathe this at the client side as well, and those moving into the buildings. Do you see what we speak about in terms of this value increase? Does that feed through? I know that the Bourne Quarter was a particularly strong building based around this methodology. Do you see that come out?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that we're doing this because we think it's the right thing to do, and there is an element of that. But clearly, when you're looking after a pension fund or any other institutional investor, the financial return is clearly a strong driver in what you're doing. And it's not a blank check at the end of the day. This stuff unfortunately does cost more money, and there's no two ways around it. And therefore, the return on that investment, the long-term benefit of that. Yes, you want to be. It feels good, and the clients like the fact that there's a responsible investment part to it around doing the right thing. But ultimately, we are paying pensioners through what we're doing, or paying their pensions, and that's the bottom line. So there was definitely some nervousness from a lot of our clients around, are we going to see any benefit from this? The reality is, and I'm asked it a lot by investors, the answer is I'd love to be able to say, yes, by doing this, by putting these solar panels on the roof, you will get an extra 10% in your rent, or your yield will be 25 basis points keener. The reality is that from my experience anyway, and what I do in the UK, I cannot point to an absolute benefit in terms of either value or rent from what I've done in terms of building or creating more efficient, better buildings. What I think I can say, and what we are seeing, is that if you don't do it, that I can't point to a green premium sat here today, but I can definitely see a brown discount. And I think it's really interesting how, anecdotally, when we are talking to tenants today for schemes like Bourne Quarter, ESG, cost of running the building, the green credentials of the building, they were never things that came up when you were talking heads of terms. It was never part of the conversation. Now tenants are definitely want to talk about it, want to understand how green the building is, want to understand particularly what the running cost of the building is going to be. And if you can point to the fact that having put solar panels on the roof and batteries in a building, that actually that tenant won't have any energy bills. Well, sat here today, that's really compelling in terms of whether a tenant will take a second-hand building where it doesn't have that stuff, or a building that we've done where it does.
Yeah.
So I think the jury's out, but equally I think the jury knows which way it's going to go, because I think we're heading in a direction where there will be a flight to quality. This is only corporately, this is only going to get more and more important in terms of what building a tenant takes in whatever sector they're in. This isn't just an office thing, this is across all sectors. So yeah, I mean, I think you're either on the bus or you're not, and if you're not, I suspect you're going to get left behind, is the reality. Yeah,
and I think part of the work that we do is for our certification is measure carbon footprint for businesses, and so often it's that scope 1 and 2, their business emissions, and that is a critical part. So you can see how it just feeds into their goals, feed into your goals, and the data on higher valuations for resi on EPCs is quite clear. But I think like you're saying, it's going to continue to mount this pressure as we get closer to these goals and closer to these key moments in the next few decades. And I guess, Richard, when we've spoken to some people, I get the sense sometimes that we're, those that are on the fence, it's almost like, should we wait and see? There's a wait and see game. And I think, interestingly, having looked at a few documents in the past on, especially, the government's own promises to, net zero by 2050 is, how, the conversation is, well, the grid's going to be greener and we're going to have more renewables. Like, what do you say to that? You've done a lot of work in energy, and so where do you think, can we rely on the government, or should we move ahead?
I think the answer to that is in two parts. One is, I think that we have to recognise that that we have done some really good things so far, and that the government has recently committed in April 2022 to the energy security strategy, which actually accelerates that growth in renewables in terms of low carbon energy into the grid. And what they're looking for is by 2030 is that 95% of the grid will come from low carbon sources. Now, that is a massive commitment, and it's ambitious, and that relies on things like the acceleration of some of the nuclear plant developments. I mean, I suppose you've seen people like Rolls-Royce developing small agile nuclear power plants, if you like. You see the advancement of hydrogen, and you see the technology development in wind and solar. So I think we can rely on them, but we shouldn't rely on them, is the case. We should set our own standards as individuals, because we all have that responsibility. And I think people who play that waiting game are the people that are going to ultimately lose out of this, because they'll be left reflecting on the fact that actually, against my neighbour, my asset doesn't look as compelling, as inviting for a potential occupier. Actually, my workforce inside this building, because it has really poor performing in terms of heat loss and heat gain, and I haven't done anything about it, where I could have done, and I could have repurposed the heat and recycled stuff. I think those people are going to be left behind, and I know of some that are already saying that, well, actually, we'll just sweat the asset. But a lot of people are looking at repurposing buildings and engaging in more agile and thoughtful policies about how they look at green energy in the future, and taking responsibility for not only managing it properly, but also sourcing it properly, in terms of actually we could do more at looking at on-site generation and on-site energy storage and recycling of wastewater, and reducing heat losses, so we reduce energy and energy demand from grid and the dependency on grid. So I think if you'd have asked me this question 4 years ago, then yeah, people will sit on the fence for forever and a day. But with recent political and global events, I think that people have woken up, and I think people are more cognizant of their own responsibilities and also their own risks. So I really think that not only are we well set to be leaders in this, but I think we're also well set to actually show other people the way, you know, because we have a thoughtful government, I think, in terms of their commitment to sustainability. And I also think we have a responsible market as well, where people are moving towards that in the future. So I think we're fair set, Lorenzo.
And I think that element of fair is really interesting. You know, a lot of the projects that we look to support at Earthly are focused not only on the carbon. You know, you need to assess the carbon. You need to ensure that it's permanent. There's no leakage. There's no additionality. But what we've done with our assessment is to look beyond just the carbon. You know, the projects need to have value on local communities. You know, looking at the equity side of things. You know, the education they can provide to local communities, and also that biodiversity aspect. You know, how are these projects really helping us for biodiversity? And you know, we are in these two crises: a biodiversity crisis and environmental, climate crisis. You know, and I guess it's important that we see that we bring this together. We need to help local communities in the global south. We have that sort of responsibility to help, and that those are the projects that we look to validate, are projects that score highly across these three goals. And I guess one of the things that, in looking purely at net zero, is do we miss out on the focus on these other elements, the social part, the biodiversity part? And I guess a question to you, Jonathan, is do you feel that we'll move forward in a world where net zero brings the social and the biodiversity with it, or do you think we'll become a bit channeled into the carbon discussion?
I hope it's all dragged along together, because embodied carbon and carbon is just one element of the issues we're facing as a species. I think Nature-Based Solutions, obviously, that's our connection Lorenzo, is going to be key to mitigating all the damage we've done, reforestation, wetland restoration, fixing the soil, can help offset a lot of the activities we do as human beings inhabiting the planet. At a macro level, that's what we need to do, and I think ultimately that then works its way down to local communities in giving them healthier spaces to live, more enjoyable places to live. It's a simple fact. We need to support sustainable agriculture, fisheries, and enhancing our resilience to extreme weather events. It's like I live in south of Manchester, and it's very average weather, but globally things are changing. It was quite a shock last year when it hit something like 42 or 43 degrees in Manchester. It was a bit scary seeing how much it's changed. So I think it's a critical, nature-based solutions are a critical part of fixing that, basically the impact we're having on the planet. And if we don't drag them all together in line, then we're probably a bit stuck. Yeah. But it's also important to ensure that the solutions are implemented in a sustainable manner. I think it's interesting seeing, I don't know, a lot of the work you're doing is to ensure this and to make sure that they're good solutions and they're doing the right thing and they are actually having the impact they said they're going to, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw you nodding, Lucy. I love your thoughts on that. Sort of, do we bring in social and biodiversity into this? Is this, do you see this coming together?
I mean, definitely. I think you ignore the other bits of this. If you just focus on one thing, it's you're not doing your bit ultimately, and definitely it all goes hand in hand. I think when you're an investor like I am in terms of commercial real estate, unless you're doing it on a scale, it's quite difficult sometimes to find a way of influencing the S part of the ESG. The E bit we get, the S bit is harder. The G we do because that's just the nature of what we're up to. Clearly, if you're in perhaps more a residential environment, then maybe the S side of life becomes a bit, or if you're in some sort of master planning system where you're doing larger scale development, then I think the S is probably an easier tick box. But it's yeah, as you say, it's working with the local communities. It's making sure that when you're doing developing or when you're managing an estate, you're basically drawing on that local workforce. It's making sure that the environment you're creating is a good environment for people to work in. This is all stuff that should be second nature anyway, because it sort of goes hand in hand with having the best assets, the best outcome. So yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say that we really we're not really focusing heavily on it and saying we must do this, but I think it does go hand in hand. The bit that sort of does slightly concern me is around where we are buying carbon offsets, or will buy our carbon offsets, which I know is clearly something that is very dear to your heart. That still feels like quite a difficult area to work in and to be in. We need the solution of carbon offsets because at the moment anyway, when we're developing something, there's always that last bit that you can't design out of the building, unfortunately, if you're building new. And to Richard's point, maybe you shouldn't be developing new, but there's an argument where a building's obsolete, you do need to redevelop. But finding a carbon offset that is credible and can achieve the carbon offsetting that you're setting out to do, that's the bit that I struggle with at the moment when I look at what's available in the market. And I think you have to be very careful where you're put. There's a reputational risk here, basically. To say I'm net carbon, I've bought carbon offsets, and then find that those carbon offsets are not what you thought they were, or disappear in 2 years' time. That's not so clever. So I think there's clearly some development in that market that needs to come through.
Yeah, I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the interesting discoveries of the work of Zero is that it's an all solutions approach to achieve the goals that we want to, in terms of carbon reduction and hitting our target goals of embodied carbon per square meter of a building. It's an all solutions approach. It needs everything to line up to even get anywhere near. You can't just go, okay, well, we'll try and do a low carbon concept. It then needs It needs a low carbon design. It needs the leadership to buy into it. It needs the investors to buy into it. It then needs the supply chain that deliver the asset to buy into it. And carbon offset will play a part of that, because assets vary. You're going to ship stuff to weird locations. You're going to build things in a certain way. So it needs the supply chain and the design community, the built environment community to engage with that. But then also it needs the ability to make decisions around carbon offsets that are good quality and do good. It's kind of a balance. Like we are taking, when we build anything, we're taking natural resources from the planet. You need to give back and create that balance. So it's an all solutions approach to get anywhere near what we want to as a species and a built environment. Sorry,
I think that's a really good point. I think you know, if you're giving all this importance to the delivery and you've made all that change when it comes to the embodied carbon, you brought everybody on the journey, you know, why not give the importance of the reduction strategy as much importance? And I think, you know, you're right, there has been some failures in the market when it comes to RED projects. Now these are projects that started, you know, almost, you know, 2025. So the methodologies and the what these people were trying to do, I think we can't fault them for, you know, for trying, but we do need to look at what we have today in terms of the technologies to be able to provide us with projects that we can assess to be delivering. And we've got to train all those other projects to come with us. And that's at the heart, you know, what we want to do, work really closely with these project developers to help them, you know, ensure that they're doing all the right things to deliver high quality projects that can match what you've done in the hard work that you've achieved to reduce emissions by 45% in that building, you know, to go that extra mile. So I think we all have to have these ambitions. We all need to strive for quality. We need to strive for more. And I think that's where the whole package comes together, because that is the aim in the end of net zero, is to have that as an entirety work as a package. And all of that needs a lot of work and a lot of quality, I guess. You know, we've got a few minutes left, but Rich, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Otherwise, I may leave it to some questions.
No, it's on point. Absolutely on point.
Super. So we have one question, I guess, but how does Earthly play into the built environment? So, you know, we help with that residual element. We are helping businesses achieve that net zero by, you know, removing those residual emissions. We're tasked with finding, you know, high quality nature-based solutions that index not only on the carbon, but on the social and biodiversity, and helping those businesses to then demonstrate what the value of that contribution, so that they can show the asset owner, the tenant, the power of that nature-based solution. That's where we come in. And, you know, for those that are looking long-term for those, you know, 2030, 2035 goals, it's, you know, can you actually, you know, maybe even originate a project of your own that has a matching set of values to enable you to deliver on that commitment, but maybe not have the inflationary risks that might occur in the voluntary carbon market over the next 10 years. So that's really where we come in as part of that sort of solution to achieve the goal. Any other questions?
Don't think so.
Super. I had one more, you know, question, I guess, for Jonathan. I think, you know, you're actually, there's a digital construction week. You know, is that something that we met there a while back and we
did.
Is that what will happen there, and what's the involvement in that? You know, do you think you can see, does that help people understand net zero at all? Is it something that
so if you combat, I fundamentally believe that the digital construction in the UK will play a massive part and globally to carbon reduction, because it facilitates a lot of the discussions, the stuff Lucy mentioned in terms of baselining, measurement. The technology we implement on projects is perfectly positioned to kind of facilitate that. The gaps are kind of around data. The baseline data to feed into the measurement mechanisms isn't there, so that's quite difficult, or it's getting there. There's various tools available for people to implement on projects that allows them to start understanding. I was recently recorded a podcast, I listened to a podcast that I sometimes host on, talking about the industry for digital twins in the UK, and the fact that the next 10 years, we're going to see a huge shift towards the use of digital twins in various different systems and methodologies. We're seeing it in our commercial clients wanting to start to use these to understand how they operate in their assets. That's quite an interesting, exciting space for us, because it flows through from the blank sheet of paper to the handover to the operation of the asset. You can measure the carbon during the delivery. You can use tools to optimize the structure, use tools to optimize the energy use, and then measure that benchmark during the actual project lifecycle, and create a feedback loop. There's still issues with procurement and supply chain, the way we deliver projects is quite often teams are chopped and changed during the delivery, and clients want to de-risk. But there's lots of exciting tech being used to do this. So another exciting piece is carbon visualization and hotspotting using gaming engines. So you can visualize where the embodied carbon is in an asset using a gaming engine, which people can say, oh, it's all in the structure, or it's all in this piece of plant, which I think is quite an interesting angle.
Yeah, and I guess Lucy, when you're delivering for your clients, they probably want to see the outcome. What do you see? What do you show them? What are they asking for in terms of? There's a lot of work in terms of dashboards. What do you think would work best in that regard?
Well, simple would be lovely, please. Yeah, the problem is that there is so much information and words, explanations of all the technology around this stuff, that is just, it's baffling actually. And for someone who trained as a surveyor, who has spent a long time in an industry where we've all been focused on financial returns, suddenly I find myself becoming an expert on things that I never thought I'd need to understand or would want to understand. But it's amazing how this is now the chatter. The agents are having to keep up with it. There's a lot of very woolly knowledge in the industry, I would say, which is why it's great that we've got people like you three to help us and support us. But if you're not careful, you can get very, very lost in this stuff. So the more simplification in terms of, again, coming back to this point around trying to narrow down what you're trying to get to in terms of what does the best building from an ESG, net zero carbon, whatever it is, agenda look like. We can make that sort of understandable in layman's terms. I think that would be hugely beneficial. But I'm not sure how easy that is.
Yeah, I think there's the challenge is always to simplify and make visual, and we work hard at that. But it's something that when there is a world of data out there, it's always harder. We have a question from Tom, which you can try to ask verbally. I don't know, Jenny, if you can allow Tom to ask the question. We've got 2 minutes left, but we'll try.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Tom.
Yes.
Hi, yes. So Tom Hill from DB3 Architects. So good talk today. Thanks a lot. Very interesting. As Rich knows, we work on various projects, but we're quite involved in sort of strategic infrastructure projects in the energy and the waste sector. We're working on zero carbon sort of projects up to 8% of the UK's delivery of power via zero carbon electricity, if that sort of makes sense. And we're working on various waste projects, historically local authority projects, and now very much private individuals or companies. My question is, it's very difficult for us to educate clients on huge projects in the net zero route. Many people are just looking for a permission that they can then sell on and somebody else can develop. So how do we educate them? And should it be focused on planning more, or the plan from the planning side, if that makes sense? Should they be pushing it?
Who wants to take that?
I'll step in there because this is quite an interesting. So basically, Tom, you're talking about creating the demand for low carbon from the client. I think the built environment does a really good job of making things insanely complex for itself when it's trying to sell stuff. And what I do is my role in digital service in WSP is to be able to speak to a client in a way that they can understand what you're trying to do.
That's what it is, sit in the sea.
But I think there's a carrot and there's a stick kind of scenario for carbon reduction. So the government can legislate and say you must do something, or we can give them the want from an investment perspective to say, if you invest in this way using these methods, you will save money through the various things that Richard and Lucy have talked about. And I think that is a better way to do it. And I'm out of time, so I shall stop. But I think our industry needs to stop overcomplicating things and just speak in a way that people can understand. And that's part of what Xero is trying to do. It's trying to just get people to carbon literacy is a really important part of our community's work, basically.
I couldn't agree more. Less of the smoke and mirrors, more of the reality of what it means. And I think with regulation, we're all going to need to understand stuff, even if we don't necessarily want to understand it. You know, it's coming. So I think, and as Rich has said, in this environment where energy pricing has gone through the roof, the argument should be so much more compelling today than it's ever been. It should be a bit of a no-brainer in terms of, you know, particularly from an occupant. If you think about a tenant and their occupational cost, you know, if you can save them their energy cost by putting solar on the roof or whatever, that's huge. That's huge today in this market, and we are finding very compelling, which then points to sticky tenants, rental growth, less voids. You know, that's all part. Unfortunately, the money side of this, from an investor point of view, is the thing that will drive people's take up of it. I'd love to say it's all because we want to do the right thing for the planet, and to a certain extent we do. But the financial driver is the key.
Yeah, sad but true. And I think that leaves us at time. I think first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for joining. Lucy, you know, Jonathan, Rich, thank you for your time. It's been really insightful. I hope it has been for others. We'll share a recording, and you know, I'm sure if you have any other questions, please chat to us offline on LinkedIn or directly. But I hope this has been helpful, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.